You'd think directors like Christopher Nolan and Martin Scorsese can do no wrong, right? Well, not exactly. Even the greats have their bad days, and these movies prove just that. From confusing plot lines to questionable choices, these are the cinematic misfires that made even the legends look a little less legendary. Look, there's plenty to appreciate in Tenet. The action set pieces are intense. Robert Pattinson seems like he's channeling Christopher Hitchens for some reason, and the sheer ambition of Nolan's time-bending thriller can't be denied. But here's the thing. Tenet is also a convoluted mess. The intricate plot proved too complicated for most audiences, leaving many confused and disconnected. Even Nolan admitted in interviews that this was his most challenging film yet.
You want to crash a plane?
But not from the air. Not so dramatic. I would have run a jet off the taxiway, breached a rear wall, and start a fire.
Well, how big a plane?
That part is a little dramatic.
It's kind of wild that David Fincher's worst film is also his debut, and a high-profile one at that. Grossing nearly $160 million, Alien 3 wasn't a financial disaster, but fans were left disappointed by the film's callous departure from its predecessors. Behind the scenes, things were even messier, with Fincher dealing with constant rewrites, studio interference, and production chaos. Fincher himself has disowned the movie, calling it a miserable experience. The film may have kick-started his career, but it came at a price. There's no one in American cinema with a legacy quite like Martin Scorsese. At this point, the Goodfellas filmmaker is more or less one of the country's defining artists. What's remarkable about Scorsese is his consistency, but that's not to say he's never put a foot wrong. The early crime drama Boxcar Bertha endures as what many agree is the filmmaker's weakest effort, a poorly aged, by-the-numbers exploitation picture that betrayed little of what would make Scorsese such an idiosyncratic director. For all of Spielberg's cinematic brilliance, comedy has never really been his thing. So it's not exactly shocking that his biggest flop was a chaotic screwball farce set around the time of Pearl Harbor. 1941 had a massive $35 million budget, huge for the time, but despite pulling in $94 million globally, the film barely broke even after factoring in its huge marketing campaign and distribution costs. For most filmmakers, a flop this big would have been career-ending, but Spielberg's success with Jaws gave him enough clout to survive it. Coppola's best films can stand toe-to-toe with pretty much anything in cinema. The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, The Conversation. However, when you look at his worst, it's frankly hard to believe they were made by the same man. And in Coppola's entire repertoire, there's nothing worse than Jack, the schmaltzy comedy starring Robin Williams as a boy in a grown man's body. Though I'm guessing we're pretty soon gonna add Megalopolis to that category. Linklater is a filmmaker who can be much admired for his versatility. He's aced everything from coming-of-age dramas like Boyhood to experimental animations. Does anyone remember A Scanner Darkly? And dark comedies. As with any director who takes such large swings, however, there are also a few whiffs, none worse than his 2005 remake of the 1976 baseball comedy The Bad News Bears. Even Billy Bob Thornton, playing a watered-down version of his bad Santa booze hound, fails to make this worth anyone's time. All of Hitchcock's best-known films came after he had already been working in the industry for a great many years. Champagne is one of many early Hitchcock films that only obsessive fans are likely to have seen. Hitchcock himself later spoke damningly of Champagne, which concerned a young woman who seeks employment after her father goes broke. The film had no story to tell, he said. Over the course of his career, Peter Jackson has proved adept at a range of genres, from fantasy epics like The Lord of the Rings to music documentaries such as The Beatles. Get Back. Comparatively, The Lovely Bones was the rare instance of Jackson getting it completely wrong. A supernatural drama about the spirit of a girl who's been murdered, The Lovely Bones is mawkish and narratively dubious, with plot beats that can't help but leave viewers annoyed and let down.
I have to go.
I don't want you to leave. I'm not gonna hurt you, Susie.
While The Matrix Reloaded has its die-hard fans, let's be real, most people didn't love it. Following The Matrix was always going to be tough, but audiences weren't prepared for Reloaded's dense, overly earnest plot, rubbery CGI, and general sense of self-indulgence. Sure, Reloaded made a ton of money, but it also went down in history as one of the most disappointing sequels ever. Back to the Future director. Zemeckis has had more than his share of troughs, along with his career's mighty peaks. The Polar Express is often held up as the apex of the sinister, uncanny valley in Western computer animation, but even that film outshines his 2009 take on Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol. Starring a digitized Jim Carrey as Scrooge, this was a joyless, cheerless humbug. Raimi has never truly had the critical kudos of some of his contemporaries, but there's a reason the Evil Dead filmmaker commands such a devoted following. He has a handful of outstanding, technically accomplished films to his name, and a couple of real stinkers too. Worst among these was Oz, the Great and Powerful, an insipid, pointless prequel to The Wizard of Oz, featuring what might be the most checked-out performance of James Franco's career.
Not going back. We're gonna find this wicked witch, steal her wand, I'll get that big pile of gold, and you can have a nice pile of bananas, all right?
Bananas. Oh, I see. Because I'm a monkey, I must love bananas, right? That is a vicious stereotype.
You like bananas?
Of course I love bananas. I'm a monkey. Don't be ridiculous. I just don't...
Revisionism be damned. Robert Altman's live-action musical take on Popeye, starring Robin Williams as the spinach-eating sailor man himself, is still a stinker. When it first came out in 1980, it was so viciously panned that Altman, one of the best American directors there's ever been, receded drastically from the Hollywood spotlight, eventually making his mainstream comeback more than a decade later with The Player. Coming off of successes like Point Break and Strange Days, The Weight of Water was an abject flop for Kathryn Bigelow. Starring Elizabeth Hurley and Sean Penn, the film was a twisty drama set across 2 time periods. Its 35% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes places it squarely in the rotten category. But anyone who's seen it might argue that 35 seems generous. Financially, the film was a complete flop, grossing just $6.2 million worldwide on a $16 million budget. Not exactly the comeback Bigelow was hoping for. Frank Capra was the master of sentimentality, churning out beloved classics throughout the 1930s and 40s. But by the time he directed Pocketful of Miracles in 1961, the magic was fading. The film, a remake of his 1933 hit Lady for a Day, didn't quite hit the mark and ended up being Capra's final film. Despite a strong cast led by Bette Davis and Glenn Ford, the movie felt like a tired rehash of his earlier work. Capra himself was so disillusioned by the whole experience that he retired from directing altogether.